is it that every time someone picks the Orange Sentinel, the only thing I can think of is the New York Knicks? Screw the Knicks.
Well, this is the season of giving, so before we get started, I'd like to thank my Pure Platinum patron, Brandon Jack Hoffman. Thank you for your support. Consider this my Christmas present to you. So, with that being said, let's return to Capcom fighting games, and one of their most famous lines of fighting games that isn't Street Fighter. I've talked about Capcom's fighting history in the past, including how Street Fighter II was a game changer for the genre, the underground following of Darkstalkers, and the unique appeal of Red Earth. But there's one series of games for which the time for me to talk about it was not a matter of if, but when. And by when, I of course mean, when's Mahvel? When's Mahvel? Now's Mahvel. Okay, so the MCU has been kinda meandering for the past phase. Let's face it, Endgame could have been the perfect moment to end the whole damn thing. But Marvel's characters and legacy have been iconic for a reason. Marvel and DC are essentially the power players in comic books, and Capcom's cooperation with Marvel has been a lucrative one to say the least. So today, I'm going to give you a brief history of the legendary Marvel vs. Capcom series. I've got 8 games to cover in all, so I can't exactly go super in-depth, but I'll do what I must with what I have. So let's pop a quarter in the slot and start this baby up! Now, Capcom's relationship with Marvel predated the first MVC by quite a margin. In fact, Capcom published an arcade game based on The Punisher in 1993, but that was a beat-em-up and unrelated to the Versus series. Our tour actually begins with X-Men, Children of the Atom, released at the end of 1994 using the long-lived CP System 2 arcade board. Loosely based on the Fatal Attraction storyline from the comics, the game featured 10 playable characters, both X-Men and villains, and the single-player mode featured a standard run-through, culminating with fights against Juggernaut and finally Magneto in his base on Avalon. Akuma was also unlockable as a secret character as per Capcom's agreement with Marvel. Considering it came on the heels of Super Street Fighter II Turbo and Darkstalkers, it borrowed the same basic conventions, including the 6-button format and the Super Gauge, which in this case had 3 levels. At level 2, you could perform an X ability, which was a more powerful move or other technique, and at maximum level, you could perform a character's Hyper X super moves. Other unique mechanics first popularized in this game was the Super Jump, which improved aerial mobility, and the ability to break throws, which required 2 levels of your gauge. This was also one of the first games where combos could get really crazy, especially with aerial combos, something that would become a trademark of Capcom's Versus series. The game was highly praised for its fast and frantic gameplay, which would only mutate from here, pun absolutely intended, but it also garnered praise for the way it captured the spirit of the comics. In fact, some of the voice actors from the animated series actually reprised their roles for the game, including Cathal Dodd as Wolverine.
Now, if that's not attention to detail, I don't know what is.
In October of 1995, Capcom would follow up with Marvel Superheroes, loosely based on the Infinity Gauntlet event comic and dedicated to Marvel artist Jack Kirby, who passed away the previous year. The 10 characters in the base roster once again is a good mix of heroes and villains, including the 4 most popular characters from the X-Men game. In the gameplay department, we have a bit of a simpler system in place, mainly with the Super Meter. However, as an added twist, a new gimmick was added to the game.
If you guessed Infinity Stones, you get a buzzer. They were actually called Infinity Gems back then.
Each of the 6 gems, power, time, reality, soul, space, and mind, had a different ability that could be activated to give you an edge in battle. On top of that, each character had an affinity with one of the gems and would gain a unique ability when using it. For instance, giving Spider-Man the power gem would let him attack with Rays of Light. Oh wait, no, that's the Pokemon move. It would actually give Spider-Man a doppelganger that would mimic his moves and deal damage accordingly. You could knock the gems away from an opponent with a special or super move, and could pick them up simply by walking over them. If you had multiple gems in your possession, you could switch which gem you used by pressing Start. In the Versus mode, you could obtain a gem by fulfilling certain conditions. However, in the Arcade mode, you obtained them as you defeated certain opponents. Eventually, you'd face Dr. Doom, before he started hanging out with Maximilian, and ultimately take on Thanos, who would steal all the gems from you and have a super for each one. You'd better go for the head on this one, or multiple continues are inevitable. Additionally, there was a secret Capcom guest character, but only in the Japanese version. Interestingly enough, it's not a character you'd expect. It was Anita, the sullen child who hung around Donovan in the Darkstalkers series. Of course, she was basically incomplete and broken. Like Children of the Atom before it, Marvel Super Heroes was a big success, praised for its gameplay and action. But it also marked the beginning of something infamous in the series: infinite combos. Every character in the game had at least two, and this is something that would continue into the series as a whole. But hey, that's not a bug, it's a feature! The crossovers would actually begin in earnest the following year with the release of X-Men vs. Street Fighter, the beginning of the Versus series proper. Naturally, this was the next step in Capcom's collaboration with Marvel, bringing together characters from both X-Men and the Street Fighter series to slug it out. This could have been just another fighting game with the boost of visibility of having the whole crossover thing. After all, they did the quick and easy route for most of the sprites, taking most of them from Children of the Atom and Street Fighter Alpha 2 respectively. But this time, Capcom decided to do something a little different with the gameplay by actually making the game a 2-on-2 tag team fighter, which would set the standard for these games going forward. Now, this wasn't necessarily the first game to try this. Kizuna Encounter Super Tag Battle predated this game by literally days, but it would be among the first to popularize it. Basically, you pick two characters from the 17 playable characters, and you could switch between them at basically any time. Not only that, but doing so resulted in a dynamic entry from your partner. Adding to the tag team strategy is the fact that some damage you take remained red instead of immediately draining away, and your reserve character gradually recovered that red health until being switched back in. That meant that knowing when to tag in was an important tactical decision. Instead of being round-based, a match lasted until both characters of either team were knocked out or the timer ran out. The tag team format would also feed into a couple new mechanics, both of which would implement the hyper gauge. The first was the variable combination in which both team members would unleash hyper combos simultaneously. The other was the variable counter, which was a guard cancel into a tag out. In keeping with the crazy action of the previous two Marvel fighting games, the Street Fighter characters' hyper combos were amped up to match, with Ryu's Shinku Hadoken being a prime example, being mutated into a Maxi Beam. By the way, this would also mark the start of Capcom's use of larger-than-life bosses, with Apocalypse being the final main boss, followed by you having one last match with your partner. At first, the game was only mildly successful, at least in North America, but it did manage to pick up steam over the next several months and became a big hit. Kinda reminds me of how Street Fighter 2 took some time to become a smash in Japan. Naturally, if Capcom made a crossover with their X-Men fighting game, then the next logical step would be to make one with their Marvel Superheroes game, right? So in 1997, Capcom released Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter to much fanfare. Following from where X-Men vs. Street Fighter left off, this is another 2v2 with the Street Fighter characters now going up against characters from across the Marvel compendium. There were 17 base characters, 9 from Street Fighter and 8 from Marvel, along with 6 hidden characters who were alternate versions of current and past characters. However, the Japanese version added an additional character, one who was shrouded in mystery and was created specifically for this game. Ladies and gentlemen, the one character in Capcom fighting history who was created to be even more pathetic than Dan Hibiki. Meet Norimaru, an original the character Do Not Steal, created as a collaboration between Capcom and Japanese comedian Noritake Kinashi. He's the game's biggest joke and everyone knows it. Meanwhile, Apocalypse returned as the giant boss, but this time he was followed by a most unexpected horseman, Cyber Akuma, a version of the classic villain who turned into Apocalypse's cybernetic servant. As for the gameplay, it's mainly the same as before, except for one big addition: assists. Known as variable assists, in this game you could use this to have your off-screen character come on to perform a move. This expanded combo potential greatly, and really gave your partner a lot more of a point. Not to mention, this would become a trademark of the series going forward. Not to mention being copied by KOF during the Nest saga.
What exactly do you think the striker system was in those games?
Now, the game received generally positive reviews, but not everyone jived with it. You see, according to former Capcom fighting game advisor Seth Killian, one of the goals of the game was to be less chaotic and more balanced. But it turns out that not all things should be perfectly balanced. Fans criticized this course of action because it thought it gave them less freedom. Needless to say, Capcom took this criticism seriously. But how to expand on the ideas of pitting Street Fighter legends against Marvel icons? Well, we expanded the scope from X-Men to all of Marvel, so it was time to do the same for the other end of the equation. which meant bringing in characters from all of Capcom. In 1998, the crossover went to the next level with Marvel vs. Capcom Clash of Superheroes. This time, the roster was only 15 base characters, 8 from Capcom and 7 from Marvel, but the Capcom side made a few deep cuts by including Strider Hiryu, Captain Commando, and even Jin from Cyberbots. And let's not forget this marked the proper fighting game debut of
Mega Man, the super fighting robot!
Plus, there were 6 hidden characters, including Roll of all characters, who could be unlocked by code. Now, unlike Marvel vs. Street Fighter before it, you couldn't call in your partner to assist. Instead, you were assigned an assist character before a match from a list of over 20 different partners, ranging from the well-known to the obscure. Seriously, who the hell knows who Pure and Fur are? Normally, these were picked at random, but you could enter in button combinations to pick the one you wanted. These assists could be triggered a certain number of times per match, depending on the assist. Now, the other and more famous mechanic introduced in this game was the Duo Team Attack. By spending 2 bars of meter, you could control both your characters for a limited time with unlimited hyper combos during the duration to boot. Considering the hard-hitting hyper combos that some characters had, it became a boon for some people to activate this move as soon as possible before the other player got a chance. As for the arcade mode, it was loosely based on the popular X-Men Onslaught arc, with the arc's namesake villain as the final boss. Considering that Onslaught was essentially a fusion between Professor X and Magneto, it should come as no surprise that his first phase had several of Magneto's moves. And then came the second phase, which was even bigger. Yeah, this one could be tough, but some teams could keep him out. Marvel vs. Capcom was another big hit for Capcom, even beating out Street Fighter III, which came out that same year on more advanced hardware. Remember how the CPS-3 came and went while the CPS-2 endured? Yeah, dominance of CPS-2 titles like this was part of the reason why. From here, Capcom decided to really pull out all the stops and really show what they can do when they wanna... 2000 saw the release of the biggest and most ambitious game the series had ever seen. Marvel vs. Capcom 2, New Age of Heroes. Unlike previous games, this game was developed for Sega's Naomi hardware, which was similar in structure to the Dreamcast. And when I say biggest, I mean it. A total of 56 characters made the cut for this game, with half of them unlocking over time. There were even 4 original characters on the Capcom side. There was the pirate Ruby Heart, the Cactus Manamingo, who was rumored to be planned for another game, Son Son, who was actually the granddaughter of the original Son Son, and the game's final boss, Abyss, who is the only fully original boss. Note the fully. With a roster this big, the gameplay had to be expanded, and this called for making this a 3-on-3 fighter. The control scheme was simplified somewhat to match, now with 2 punches and 2 kicks, along with 2 partner buttons used for partner assists. The fighting system expanded by quite a bit. New techniques included the snapback, which could force out the opponent's current character for one of their partners, 3 different assist types per character, team hyper combos where you could perform all 3 of your character's hyper combos in succession, and even bigger crossover combinations. The assists in particular could really help extend combos, though your partners could be damaged while on screen, so you had to exercise caution. As far as the presentation goes, the jazzy soundtrack had a few bops to it, and the graphics combined classic pixel sprites with 3D backgrounds. The game was a huge success, and many still consider it to be the height of the series. Now, is the game balanced? Pfft, hell no! Imagine how hard it is to balance a fighting game with 28 characters. Now try expanding that to 56. That's whole freaking orders of magnitude. But man, was it hype. It was a real highlight of esports for quite some time, and is still popular today. Not to mention, it gave us some pretty memorable memes, like the Mango Sentinel, Mahvel baby, and Meg fucking Nito! Where yo curly mustache at? Unfortunately, it hasn't been released for a while. The most recent console ports were on PS3 and Xbox 360, and they're no longer available.
Don't tell me hashtag FreeMVT2 is over. If the only official modern way to play it is on a $600 novelty arcade cabinet, that ain't free, buddy.
Now this would be the last MVC game in the arcades, and for a while the last MVC game period due to licensing issues between Marvel and Capcom. In the meantime, Capcom would make Tatsunoko vs. Capcom in 2008, which is also the same year that Capcom and Marvel struck a new deal. Naturally, Capcom went right to work developing a new Marvel game, and in 2011, 2 years after Disney acquired Marvel, the series returned to much fanfare with Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Fate of Two Worlds, on PS3 and Xbox 360. The game was made on the NT framework for awesome cel-shaded 3D visuals. First time Morrigan appeared without that immortal sprite of hers. It also went in hard with the comic book aesthetic, right down to the final boss, Galactus, literally ripping the page to announce his entrance. Once again, this was a 3-on-3, but the control scheme changed somewhat. Instead of 2 punches and 2 kicks, this time we had light, medium, heavy, and a special exchange button, which was mainly for starting air combos and activating the new Team Aerial combo, which let you change characters in the middle of an air combo for added benefits. The other new mechanic was X Factor, a hyper mode which temporarily grants added damage, speed, and health regen, and lasts longer the fewer members you still have. The roster, while smaller than Marvel 2, was definitely not lacking in variety, especially with newcomers like Dante, Zero, Beautiful Joe, She-Hulk, Thor, and especially Deadpool.
Magneto, welcome to die!
The base roster had 36 characters, with Jill Valentine and Shuma Gorath added as DLC. There were plans for more DLC, however, later that year was the devastating Tohoku earthquake, and with a disaster like that, DLC would be the least of our worries. So it was eventually decided later that year to package the would-be DLC characters into an enhanced re-release called Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, for a total of 50 characters in all. Where else could you literally lay down the law with Phoenix Wright against Doctor Doom? And hell, thanks to the more recent PC re-release, the moderns have gone crazy with adding even more characters to the mix.
That's one thing I will give PC credit for.
Now, despite the critical and financial success of Ultimate Marvel 3, the series would end up on another protracted hiatus. The reason? A powerful rat named Charles Wait, what? No, I mean Disney! Yeah, the media super conglomerate decided not to renew Marvel's agreement with Capcom, choosing instead to focus on their toys-to-life game, Disney Infinity. This led to Capcom being forced to pull both Ultimate Marvel 3 and the re-releases of Marvel 2 from digital stores. Of course, Disney Infinity was never meant to last, and in 2016, they abandoned not only the game, but their self-publishing model in favor of third-party licenses. Again. This, of course, included Capcom, who not only re-released Ultimate Marvel 3 on PS4, Xbox One, and the aforementioned Steam port, but a brand new game which was announced at the PlayStation Experience in late 2016, with a cool cinematic trailer featuring X, Ryu, Iron Man, and Captain Marvel. This is the final stop on our tour, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. And, well, oof. To be fair, the gameplay was really good, going back to a control scheme somewhat similar to Marvel 2, with 2 punches and 2 kicks, and 2 other utility buttons. The first was for partner switching, which is more freeform than in previous titles. You have Active Switch, which simply lets you switch partners via run-on, and Counter Switch, which tags in your partner while you're being attacked in order to break out of a combo. The other utility button was for the return of the Infinity Stones.
Yes, they were actually called Infinity Stones this time.
They work differently than in Marvel superheroes. Instead of picking them up at random, you picked one of 6 before a match. They had 2 abilities. One was Infinity Surge, which was a smaller scale power and helped fill a separate meter. Once that meter was at least 50%, a special hyper mode called Infinity Storm could be activated, triggering a cool special power until the gauge ran out or you performed a level 3 hyper. So the gameplay was cool. The problem? Basically everything else. The roster was even smaller than base Marvel 3, with a base roster of 30. The Marvel side in particular lacked some iconic names like, well, basically any of the X-Men. In fact, nearly all of the Marvel roster were in the MCU at the time. And the justification was a major PR blunder. Remember the whole functions debacle? Then there's the game's presentation. Lackluster character models, bad voice direction, weird animations. Yeah, the trailers made some of those issues very apparent. The game just felt comparatively sterile. Last and certainly not least, the cinematic story mode. They tried to make a coherent story out of this crossover, with various heroes teaming up to defeat Ultron Sigma, the only final boss in the series that matches up 2 characters from their respective universes. The problem was that it played out like a bad fanfiction. A cinematic story mode didn't work for Street Fighter V with their style. What made them think it was gonna work here? Add to that some poor DLC decisions and an embarrassing collector's edition. Need I bring up the Infinity Eggs again? And the game was an unfortunate but predictable failure in terms of sales. Shame, too. The fans were hoping for so much better. But with such a disappointing entry, I guess it's little surprise that we haven't seen anything from this partnership since then. And it's a real bummer. The collaboration between Marvel and Capcom gave us some really awesome games while it lasted, some of which are icons in fighting games to this day. In fact, there was going to be a very special Marvel vs. Capcom 2 tournament at EVO in 2020 before the event got cancelled due to the pandemic. It just goes to show just how legendary and ambitious this crossover was. Nowadays, Marvel has licensed games all over the place, both in developers and in quality. As for Capcom, well, they don't seem too interested in developing new fighting games unless they're Street Fighter. So sadly, the only hope for more official MVC may well be in a collection, and even the chances of that happening seems somewhat iffy. But that's not gonna stop fans from hoping.
After all, if Capcom is willing to give attention to something as obscure as Red Earth, then there's always some chance they can get in touch with Disney again and do something new. Considering how good Street Fighter 6 is looking, I'm sure that a new Marvel game could look spectacular. I'm sure there's a lot of true believers out there who are wishing and hoping for the best. I'm the Quarter Guy, and until next time, the arcade is closed.
Hey everyone, QG here. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the video around. Feel free to check out my Twitter and my Twitch streams, and consider supporting me through Patreon and donating to my Extra Life campaign to support Children's Wisconsin. Thanks for watching.